what do you think changed, from the 50s, 60s into the 70s? Of course, the 60s race wars and lots of assassinations and burning bras and sexual revolution and Woodstock and everything else. I mean, was it just that? Or, I mean, because the church wasn't participating in those things by and large.
Yeah. And I'll put two words in here. One, what changed, and then a word of hope that it'll change back in many ways. Yeah. I mean, you have the whole sex, drugs, and rock and roll.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to Contra Talk. My name is Richard Henry, and this is the podcast where we talk about things that matter. My guest today is one of my mentors. He's a friend and a father, grandfather. He's been a seminary professor, president, been in the Army Reserves, church planter, a pastor in Arkansas, church planter in Chicago. He's worked with the executive board. He's been on the SBC stage. He's been in many different places. He writes prolifically. He's been doing many, many things for many, many years. Very faithful servant of the Lord, Dr. Mark Coppenger. He's a great friend. And this is a conversation where we talk about several different things that he's seen in his 50-plus year ministry, in all the different aspects, what he sees with the SBC, the conservative resurgence, politics, and just culture in general. So it's really helpful. We touch on a lot. So watch till the end because there's a lot here. Hope you enjoy. All right, welcome to the show, Dr. Coppenger. How are you doing today?
Doing great. Good to see you, Richard. By the way, I was for those listening in, I was just up in Kentucky. He's just turned 40, and I missed the party by one day. I can't work my calendar right, but that way I got to go to the house, his house, and have him to myself. But
right.
Much appreciate you, Richard. I'm sorry I missed it today, and thank you for supper.
No, that was good. Yeah, Jenny was hanging out with another friend whose birthday was that day. So. And providentially, you come and hang out with the kids and me. So that was a lot of fun.
Appreciate it.
So you've been on the show before. We were in person, I guess it was like 2 years ago now, there in Nashville. Since you're down in Nashville there, you've been there for a while. You've been, seminary president in Midwestern in the 90s. You taught at Southern. You taught at Wheaton, educated at Vanderbilt with your doctorate. You were in the Army. Is that right? Way back when?
Yeah, Guard and Reserve mainly, 28 years.
That's right. And so, you're very experienced, a man's man, husband, father, 10 grandchildren, right?
10 grandkids, yeah.
10 grandkids. You've written widely, traveled a lot, very, very well read. So this conversation is going to be really good. I'm going to enjoy it. I always enjoy. I had you in seminary for several different classes as well. And I think you were my very first class, although we had met the semester before. It was a church and state relations class back in 2014. That was good.
Sure.
You made us read a 1,000-page, and it was just like, well, I'm in seminary now. 1,000-page book. Let's do this. Wait, we're supposed to read this the entire, like this the semester? So break it down 100 pages or so a week, and you get it done. Well, we're going to talk about several different things, looking at manhood. Kind of lastly, we're going to look at the SBC as our second question, but coming into just umbrella right now, how do you see the church today than you did, say, 50 years ago? Where is the American church from the 1970s to the 2020s? Where are things changed? Where are we? And not just the church, but kind of politics, culture, give it a rating. Just kind of, where are we? Are we on a good path or are we on a bad path? I know this might be kind of a redundant question, but.
Yeah, I think we're on a very bad path as a nation. We joke about this, but I was a kid of the 50s. I was watching Ozzie and Harriet and Father Knows Best and Leave It to Beaver and these kinds of guys. And even though those were, precious little set pieces, they reflected the world that I grew up in. I grew up in a college teacher's home, Christian college teacher's home, and a pastor's home in South Arkansas. And there were problems. It was still the Jim Crow South, but there was stability. You could leave your door open. The church was solid. They had codes on television. We didn't have cable back then. We didn't have internet. And it was just kind of a very solid place. And grew up with I mean, you could trust you could trust the FBI, and they weren't teaching you crazy woke things with transsexuals in the military. I mean, things were really in a sense idyllic on a lot of levels, and I just think we've just I don't know, exploded or spun out of control, and things that were unthinkable are now enforced, not only thinkable but enforced.
Mhm.
I think we're in a terrible mess right now, and I think the church has tried, I think, too hard to be ingratiating to the culture. In fact, I use the word ingratiationism. I think we think that the key is not to be offensive. The key is to connect in such a way that people aren't turned off. The old thing, how are you going to, like fish, how are you going to clean them if you don't catch them first? And this kind of thing. And so I think um, we've become squishy as a church. I don't mean you have to come out and thunder all the time, and every Sunday sinners in the hands of an angry God. But
Mhm.
it seems to me the church was more plain spoken back then. For one thing, we had revivals. Now I know those are you can't plan a revival, but we would have special pastors in every year, and it was understood to be a time of renewal and harvest and so forth. And now we've outgrown that. Also, it's funny. I went to Wheaton. I went to grad school in '70, and then went on to Wheaton to teach for 6 years at that time. And the Christian publishers were reliable in a way. I mean, you could take
Mhm.
InterVarsity and Erdman's, so to speak, to the bank. Zondervan, a lot of stuff out of Grand Rapids, uh, and now it strikes me that a number of these Christian presses and magazines, even Christianity Today, have gone, I guess you could say, woke, and have been chasing the judgment of the culture to be winsome. And so there's very few things. There are very few things in the church and society where you can lean against and your arm doesn't go through the drywall.
It's like
a very
tissue paper. Yeah.
yeah, very troubling time.
Yeah. I guess, and we all probably have our theories like, oh yeah, especially big thinkers. I know I do that, just kind of thinking macro.
Yeah.
Um, even though I wasn't living, born in '83, right, just turned 40. But history is a good teacher,
Mhm.
and it helps us at least understand where people are. Just like 50 years from now, if the Lord tarries, we're going to be, I'll be old. You'll likely be in glory. A lot of other people will be much older. My kids will be middle aged, etc.
Yeah.
And so, or I'll be dead, right? I mean, I'll be 90, I
Mhm.
guess. Like, there's a whole. We're living history right now, and so even COVID stuff and this, that, and the other, and electric cars and kind of shoving everybody off of coal and off of gasoline into this, and it's like,
Yeah.
is that really, are we really making the right decision?
Yeah.
We heard that with, I want to be on the right side of history, blah blah blah.
Yeah. Yeah.
But what was it? I mean, again, I might know the answer, maybe people listening too, but what do you think changed, from the 50s, 60s into the 70s? Of course, the 60s race wars and lots of assassinations and burning bras and sexual revolution
Mhm.
and Woodstock and everything else. I mean, was it just that, or I mean, because none of the church wasn't participating in those things by and
Yeah.
large. And where, again, kind of fill us in, especially the boots on the ground. You were there, and I have a hunch you were paying attention, at least from a distance.
Yeah. Sure.
What
Sure.
what
Yeah.
what what changed? Right.
Yeah. And I'll put two words in here. One, what changed, and then a word of hope that it'll change back in many ways. Yeah. I mean,
Hmm.
you have the whole sex, drugs, and rock and roll coming out in the '60s in Woodstock, and it was celebrated in a lot of ways. I mean, sure, you had some old guys, you know, frowning on TV or something like that, but generally speaking, it was celebrated. And on the cover of Newsweek and Time, you'd have the Flower Children and Haight Ashbury in San Francisco, and I think a big player, one thing that's plaguing our culture in unthinkable ways is just pornography, and Playboy started in, and then you had Penthouse came in, and it was rougher, and then all of a sudden we had cable TV, and HBO would bring stuff, and then the internet, and
Hmm.
so that's a very powerful force. I mean, there's some things that are powerful, and they do a lot of cumulative damage, and alcohol is one. I think. I mean, I just know so many people who have through the army and the like. I know so many people who were wrecked. Their careers were ended. They would at infantry school, they'd drive their newly bought Fiat into a tree, or pick a fight at the officers club, or people. And so I do think that does a lot of damage. But the pervasiveness of pornography is something that maybe Paul was familiar with in some places. Maybe maybe oh, where's the volcano? I'm blanking out right now. In Naples,
Vesuvius.
Vesuvius. But anyway, it was that town that got wiped out. I mean, there are spots like that, and temple prostitutes in Corinth. But so we're awash with that, and it's very seductive. Then you have the whole push for equality of outcomes, the erasure of men and women's distinctions, and complementarianism is really kind of a backwater in the church compared to the culture where it was understood before. Anyway, you have this Gramsci thing about the march through the institutions, and I even remember when I went to Vanderbilt for grad school back in '70. Even when it was raw, it was permitted all over the unraw was permitted too. I mean, it was just crazy town. I came from a little Baptist school called Ouachita, and we had intimations of this, but I come to Vanderbilt, and wow, I mean, one week we have some guys from the Opry on campus singing good old family songs, and then we'd have Noam Chomsky come in, or the San Francisco Mime Troupe, and they do some kind of obscene play, and it was just craziness. Some guys would do ROTC, and then other guys would go to drill and have a ceremonial washing of the American flag because of the sins of Vietnam and all that, and all kinds of stuff could go. I mean, they would have Jane Fonda on campus, and then a month later they'd have a film mocking Jane Fonda. So it was kind of exhilarating in some respect that it was. But then now when I go back and when I follow what's happening, I call it this. When the university started, they were unified around a Christian worldview, whether it's Oxford or Harvard. And then following the German model, they became more like multiversities. That is, everybody's doing their specialty, and it's all over the place. And there's no unifying Christian thought or even anti-Christian thought. But now I call it monoversity. And the monoversity is one that enforces a certain way of thinking, and they cancel you or they won't hire you and the like. So now it's not fun anymore at the university campuses. And so I just think through academia and even now the military, and certainly the bureaucracies, and even the churches, we've just nationwide become, and I think the nuns are rising, not the ones with the black covering in the Catholic Church, but the NONES, and people are becoming more and more affluent and secular and decadent and indifferent to the church, and so that takes a lot of the health out of the culture too. Just a quick word of hope. I mean, I can't remember when it was. I guess it was when I was in seminary, and I was reading material on prayer for spiritual awakening, that I started to study the revivals. And you'd have in the Hebrides or the Welsh revival, or the prayer revival of 1857 in New York, and Jonathan Edwards, and then Charles Finney. I mean, the second Great Awakening in America, even though Finney's got his problem. And I thought, wow, the old thing that says, the night is always darkest just before the dawn. And I've become more and more hopeful that the wheels are coming off the other thing. And, I look even at the Bud Light deal, and now NASCAR's under fire for running off a driver who liked a tweet or whatever, and Target's taking a hit. And I think some places are pulling out their, DEI guys and ESGs, or what is it? Environmental, social, governmental, what have you.
The DEI diversity.
DEI, and then I think nationwide or in corporations, it's this other thing. And I think it's wearing thin. I do think that the FBI and the Justice Department, and certainly the presidency, is now, these are the big leaders. I think they're being embarrassed, And I think people are getting close to the gag reflex. So I'm hopeful that people will say, we've tried this other stuff and we're just empty and diffuse.
Mhm.
Let me mention one other thing. Well, I'll get back to it, but go ahead. I'm just
Okay. No, I mean, and I think that's good. I mean, I remember, in California, when we were living there, which where we're from, right? And I remember 2008, of course, Obama's, Messiah campaign, blah, blah,
Yeah,
blah.
yeah,
And at the same time in California, of course, this is 7 years before Obergefell and the same-sex marriage ruling,
right.
that Prop 8. And that was, if
Yeah,
you vote
oh,
yes, you're affirming same-sex marriage is wrong,
yeah,
traditional marriage or natural marriage. It still passed with 52%. You just needed a bare minimum majority. And yet that was even 8 years before there was another referendum on marriage in 2000. So, I mean, this has been going a while.
yeah,
But I remember in 2008 and Prop 8 and everything like that, and people pushing it, and Target was like, I think Target actually at that point had donated the pro standard traditional marriage
yeah,
and against same-sex marriage. And several other companies, but like Home Depot and a few others, and Levi's and Apple, and they were already left. And I remember people boycotting, and there's a few companies I still don't shop at just because of that. And everybody was like, "Well, boycotts don't work. They don't work. They don't work." And then now we got 15 years later. I guess the whole lies of, "Hey, we just want to be equal. Hey, we just want to be able to visit in the hospital when they're sick. Hey, I just want to adopt kids." And we're like, "Okay, okay, okay." And everybody just kind of keeps leaving the door wider and wider open.
mhm,
Now it's like, dude, Bud Light, really? NASCAR, really? Like you're coming after our kids. Oh, we're just kidding. Like,
yeah,
no, you're not. Like, hello. And you're chopping off healthy body parts. I mean, it's just
yeah, yeah,
crazy now. And
yeah.
so I think you're right. They're 15, 20, 30 years ago, we should have been like, hey, this is a little tricky. I don't think so. But
Yeah,
that's the trouble that average people, and I experienced this in my youth, especially in my 20s, and came to faith at 23, 24. So kind of new and trying to fight the culture and this and being in Southern California and all that. And yet you don't want to be seen as an idiot, right? Or uh, fundamentalist or
yeah,
something like
yeah,
that.
yeah, sure.
But at the same time, most people just kind of go with the flow. It's just a big
Mhm,
river and we're just all flowing down. It's like, hey, everybody, this is fine. Why do you care what they do in their bedroom? Blah, blah, blah. That
yeah.
type of argument.
And the other
Uh,
thing, I mean, there is the flow, and that's a huge part of how we find ourselves downstream. But now, if you try to crawl out of the stream, they'll punch you in the face, and you fall
yeah.
back in the river. I mean, I'm thinking about every day. I seem to read about some teacher who was suspended because he wouldn't use a preferred pronoun or something like that. I mean, they are really pounding people now, and the cancel culture is huge. It's funny. I remember just a quick remembrance of the Southern Baptist Convention. Back in the day, the Southern Baptist Convention was more insular. I grew up in the South, and my daddy taught in four Southern Baptist colleges, actually, when I was
Hmm.
growing up, including
Oh, well.
Newman, Belmont, and Washita, and Cumberland. And we and we would use Sunday school quarterlies from the Sunday school board, and and they would go to Ridgecrest to our conference centers in the summer to pack
Mm.
auditoriums to hear beloved pastors, and it was not all broken up, but and it was I think it was a quite a wonderful gathering of folks, but it was more insular. And when things started to go bad in the seminaries, then we would turn to Zondervan, the Battle for the Bible, or we would, read John Stott over here, or what have you. We had to go outside to get our correction, or even
Interesting.
our sort of sustenance. It's sort of like, I think something's wrong, but none of our denominational press, the state papers, no, everything's fine. And so we had to go outside to these guys, to people who would be passing the Chicago Statement on Biblical Inerrancy. Well, those are basically Northern evangelicals, essentially. So, but today, and I think part of it is, I don't know if it's a testimony to the amiability of Southern Baptists, that we're just so, and even evangelicals, like, somebody, there's systemic racism, or, oh my goodness, somebody's hurting, or, oh, we've offended, or, this kind of stuff. And so we have to go outside to the secular world to get guys like John McWhorter, or Jordan Peterson, and some of these guys, even like Joe Rogan, or occasional
Yeah.
Bill Maher or somebody who'll punch these guys and say, "This is ridiculous. Oh, we can't say that. We can't say that." And so it's really odd how a lot of times we have to go outside to a different group to get that prophetic word because we're just so down home sweet or something. I don't know.
I've thought about that recently, and I've thought about it before, of course, but you got Joe Rogan, you got Tucker Carlson,
Yeah.
Jordan Peterson, Dennis Prager to a degree, although he's losing a lot of credit in my mind.
Yeah.
With his like weird kind of the law, and if you're not acting in your heart and whatever, it's not sin if you think about it. And anyway, and what would you say, Bill Maher, several other guys that you're like, even 10 years ago, I remember when Bill Maher made that silly documentary 15 years ago, Religulous, I think it is, or,
yeah.
making fun of, and I mean, he's adamantly anti-Christian. Like he pulls no punches, but he's also not a leftist. He's not woke either.
Right.
And so, what's his face? Jordan or James Lindsay, right?
Yeah.
A lot of these guys, and you see some of them kind of get partnered. I know we did this a few years ago with I can't remember his name now, but they did the documentary with Founders, right?
Yeah.
And all that, or Founders used that.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize James Lindsay wasn't a believer at that point. And you're like, wait, this guy's an atheist?
Yeah.
Why is that? Like, why do you? I mean, honestly, like, kind of brass tacks. Why is it? Why can't we look at the SBC president? Why can't we look at even most of the seminary presidents or college presidents? These, the head of Lifeway, Tom Rayner, guys like this, Moeller. I mean, I know some of them are a little bit quote unquote better than others, but why? Like, what happened?
Yeah, boy. I mean,
That's a big question.
Somebody was saying way back, maybe in the 90s, they were talking about the 5 points of Calvinism, and the other point for Southern Baptists was just sweet fellowship and niceness or something like that. Yeah, whatever. Yeah. I mean, I know they think of battling Baptists, but no, we just want fellowship to reign. I think there's a new angle that's come in, and it's winsomeness. Mark Devine down at Beeson has written about this recently, but I was at Fort Campbell the other day on the way up to your place, and I got a military book on clear thinking. They had a little thing for leaders, and it talked about the same thing, the Overton window. And it's named for a guy who conceived it. He didn't live very long. I forgot why he died young. But anyway, he says there is a set of acceptable ideas or practices at any given moment. And you go too far this way, and like you're anathema, go too far this way, you're anathema one way or the other. And so there is this thing, and I think Tim Keller gets some good credit for this too, that winsomeness is the thing, as you're relating to people in Manhattan and, not getting too far out in front of them, but still bringing them something they're not hearing necessarily. The problem is, by being winsome to the thought leaders and the cool dudes and the cool kids, capital K, in society, is that it moves. And it moves to the left. And what was unthinkable over here outside the Overton window now is acceptable. And then someone who has reservations about it, who used to be normal, is now considered somehow prickly or embarrassing. So what you end up doing is punching right. That is, no, you're criticizing these people. Chill. So you punch these guys right, and then you embrace left. Like, no, we love you and here, and we won't bring this up, and we'll wait. And so it just drifts. It's sort of like if you're trying to stay in the middle of the road, the highway is bending. So I think we have thought that's our best strategy. The other night, I get these vet ticks things. By being a veteran, I get free or discounted tickets. It's a fun thing, and I can take relatives and I'll go to things that I really want to hear, like the Messiah, or even a NASCAR race, or see the Predators play, or something like that, or Michael Bublé. We heard him. Sometimes I went to see ZZ Top, and but the other night I floated around with family and my small group at church, and it turns out my granddaughter wanted to go hear Steven Furtick and Elevation Worship, and out of North Carolina. And I thought, I don't know so much or whatever. Well, they filled Bridgestone Arena, and it was just, that's a big hall. I mean, 10, 20,000 beats me. That's where the Predators
Yeah.
play. And so we're in there, and there's a lot of exciting music. And I have to say, here and there, you'd kind of get a taste of heaven. They were singing about the people of Judah gathered around the throne. And I mean, they bring it big. And so that was exhilarating. And then Stephen got up and he spoke, and he was talking about God's goodness and this and that. And there's some nice things, but it was really the half story, and it was all elevation and excitement and so forth. And you never, I don't think I did. I think I listened. You never heard a word about sin or repentance or brokenness for your broken life and so forth. And so I think we just do not like to dwell on judgment and brokenness. And in James it talks about weep and wail, and then I'll lift you up. And there wasn't a bit of weeping and wailing in there. And so I think we're into the old expression, the happy clappy thing going. And that's not exactly how revival happens. Revival happens when a Mordecai Ham or Bertha Smith and the Shantung revival and so forth, they come in and they say, guys, we are really out of whack. So we're kind of we're flush now with the excitement. And if you alienate your people, they're not going to listen to you. And
right.
And you don't want to be a jerk stomping around with jack boots, but still the whole counsel of God. And I think we may be slowly waking up to that. A lot of celebrity stuff going on, and the big brands, and so the young people watch, and then you have the leaders who I think we've had in a convention. We've had two really big, and I would call them scams. I'm sorry, but one was the Resolution 9 thing about systemic racism, the importance of CRT, and continuing bottomless resentment and recrimination and the like. And then I would say in a denomination that had 28 million different people in the first 20 years of the Southern Baptist Convention of the year 2000 to 2020, that when the Houston Chronicle came up with like 210 convictions or whatever out of all that, it was sort of like, and then multiply it by 10. I mean, sure, they don't catch some of them or convict some. You're still talking about like one identifiable, provable offender in like a dozen mega churches. Like, well, sure. I mean, there's probably an embezzler and a wife beater, and I mean, that's a lot of people, and yet we have just gone crazy to drain millions of dollars off of our mission funds and fall all over ourselves. And I'm thinking we've been scammed twice. I mean, sure, you deal with all these things, but we just get took. Someone comes in and says, hey, I'll redo your driveway, and you turn around and they paint it black and don't put asphalt down, and you leave, and like, oh, we got took. Oh, here's a magazine salesman. And, no, here's a Nigerian prince. So I just think we're kind of good-hearted people, but we're slowly waking up. I'm hopeful we are.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. And it's funny because I mean, there's even like a little voice in my own head that says, well, yeah, but that's still bad. And and you're not saying it's not bad, right? But I think some people, JD Greer's and these other guys who they, Russell Moore before he left the SBC, people like that, it's hard these days to really gauge whether these people are malevolent or, I mean, in my estimation, or they're just ignorant, or they're just trying to bend over backwards and be winsome. It's really, obviously you want to be Christ-like, and you want to, love covers a multitude of sins, et cetera, but we also want to not be fools and not answer the fool to his folly. We want to be discerning. We want to be wise. So there's this balance that, all believers, especially in our modern, probably the last few hundred years, we kind of like to dwell on, a handful of verses and concepts, whatever camp you're in. And then, well, what about these? Somebody else brings up, and it's like, well, this one. And you're like, yeah, but what about this one? And they just kind of dissuade it. I think it's something that we definitely, I think a lot of people are waking up to that and paying attention to more than they were even a decade ago,
I mean, I
because
think,
we realize it doesn't work.
yeah, yeah. No, I think your point in your question, is it malevolent or is it ignorant? Is it this or that? And I think it's a real big mixture. I mean, I think most people are just saying, "Hey, this is awful," and I think some of these guys ought to be shot. I mean,
Yeah.
but boy, there's one guy named Alan Jordan who he's a remarkable guy. He was like the CFO of the Texas Baptist Charities for Children and so forth, and he helped expose this big Ponzi scheme that the Arizona Baptist Foundation was running, and has been
Oh.
quoted in the Wall Street Journal to do so. Well, he went to work on this Houston Chronicle thing, and he says a lot of it's bogus. But be that as it may, I think the majority of people are just shocked, like, we got to do something about it. Look, a whole newspaper page full of pictures, you know. Yeah, hold that up to 28 million pictures, and let's put, but
Right.
it's kind of like the
Put
COVID.
it in perspective. Yeah.
Put it in perspective. I think it's like the COVID thing that, yeah, I mean, some people died, and I was an interim pastor up in Henderson, Kentucky during the raging of the whole thing and the break of the thing, and just a lot of people were just concerned for each other and the like. And yet there are people who used COVID, and I think maybe in some of the election procedures and just gaining a variety of powers and so forth and so on, that, like, yeah, there was a concern there, but I think somebody played us to some extent or overdid it, and we're just, well, what do we know, you know?
Yeah.
So I think we've been played big time a couple of times. One thing that just astonished me, I have to say, and in a very good way, was when in New Orleans, the churches voted to exclude Saddleback. I mean, it's sort of like,
Yeah.
I know Rick going back, and I didn't think he used to be so susceptible to these enthusiasms, but he just brought it, and it was such a turnoff. One person joked, he got his 3 minutes to make his statement, and someone said for the rebuttal they should have given him 3 more minutes, just to kind of keep doing his thing, because it was so off-putting.
Yeah.
And for the vote to go close to 90%, I thought, wow, we're still not susceptible to the cool currents in a way. So I was
Yeah.
encouraged by that.
Yeah, no, that's let's dive in a little bit deeper onto that then. So you mentioned critical race theory course 2019. There wasn't a meeting in 2020,
Right.
and then Nashville 2021, Anaheim 2022, and then this
Mhm.
year, 2023, New Orleans.
Mhm.
What have you seen? Now, I've been to the last three. Obviously, you've been to a lot more. Like I said, paying a lot more, much closer attention, and experienced a lot more than me. Where if we're kind of a cruise ship, and we're heading toward, the edge of Niagara Falls, if you will, are we still on the precipice, and we're about to crash here any moment, like some, podcasters and authors and guys say, or where is it? Have we turned a little bit? Has the ship
Yeah.
stopped? What have you seen the last four meetings?
Yeah. I mean, I think I'm encouraged a bit, I have to say. I mean, for one thing, I think someone who did enormous damage to the Southern Baptist Convention, uh, to a lot of people's surprise, was Russ Moore. In that he came out and he insulted the vast majority of the denomination. I mean, I think he wanted to ingratiate himself to the New York Times and to Huffington Post and to the Washington Post and the like. And he came out in one piece and he basically said, if you vote for Trump, you cannot count yourself a values voter.
Mm.
And like, oh, really? I mean, so then we let Hillary win, or what are you saying? But he was riding that horse, and then just all over, Trump, just contempt, kind of like David French, and uh, it's like, okay, we know you feel that way, but don't you work for the ERLC, and are we paying your thing to call us a bunch of jerks? Well, I mean, if we're all like owning slaves and he comes out and does it, that's one thing, but this other's not
Mhm.
so clear. And then there are other cases where the guys in charge were just saying, you guys are losers, listen to us. In the seminaries, as you said, they jumped on board with the race thing big time. And then we had this massive celebration of MLK, and it's like, you can't touch Trump with a stick because some of the things he said, but then we're
Mhm.
celebrating MLK, and I'm I'm working on a book celebrating his I Have a Dream speech, but still, I mean, he was a philanderer, and we're going to celebrate him to the heavens. And it's like, what are you doing? And then I think he delayed reporting some things out about the women's thing, so he could play that card. I mean, the abuse thing, play that card right before the convention. He just became a really, really bad operator, and I think he's showing himself up in that CT world now. So I think that's a good thing that he's moved down and he's showing himself.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, I mean, he was my provost and he was my dean. And like, what in the world got into you? So I'm encouraged there. I think that David Platt was kind of a disaster at IMB, and they're just things like the presidents of the seminaries have finally, or they pretty quickly, once they put their finger in the wind and found out they messed up, have repudiated CRT to some extent. And so what you do is you've got these guys like Tom Askell out there coming to the mic saying something's rotten in Denmark, and the other guys are sitting on their hands. But that's playing out now. And so I'm encouraged by that. To go back, when the convention started this thing in 1979, the conservative resurgence for biblical inerrancy, Adrian Rogers came out of the blue and shocked everybody. Like, wait, this guy's an outlier. He's not in the swamp, so to speak. What just happened? Timothy George and Dave Dockery had me write an article on Hobbes for this Baptist Theologians book back in the early 80s. And I went to Oklahoma City and sat down with Hobbes for a few hours and interviewed him. He was president of the convention. He essentially wrote
Herschel Hobbes, right?
Herschel Hobbes, yeah, pastor First Baptist Oklahoma City, and he also wrote essentially the 1963 Baptist Faith and Message. So he was a big dude. And he was saying, I don't feel great about how there's been this crunching and the turnaround. And I said, well, how would you do it? And he said, well, they came to us in the 50s and said, you got problems in the seminaries. And we thought, no, baptisms are up, bishop appointments are up, we're sailing along, go away. They came back in the 60s, said, no, something's really wrong. And I could give you all kinds of examples, like one Southeastern prof saying, the miracle of the loaves and the fishes was the little boy shared his lunch and there was a infectious love thing and everybody's sharing their lunch. They were teaching this stuff in the seminary. And so he said, go away, numbers are great, the giving's great. And he said they came back in the 70s and it was too late. And he said the answer is prevention, and we were asleep at the wheel. And I think that a number of our leaders have been asleep at the wheel or even driving down the wrong road. But here's what happened. Instead of just the people on expense accounts and whether they're working from the agencies or pastors of more affluent churches who had, expense account to the convention and could travel halfway across the country. And, these guys were just, the good guys getting it done in approved ways. And then all of a sudden the word got out with Paige Patterson and Paul Pressler and others in some publications, and guys started loading up their maximum 10 messengers in 15 passenger vans, and these guys would take off from the mill or selling insurance or whatever, drive all night from Oklahoma City or someplace, and maybe even sleep in the van or find some little Motel 6 or Notel Motel or something, and then they would go in and vote for the president. And that means the winning president could then appoint, and things started to change. And they'd have to get back to the van. They couldn't stay for the whole thing. And the people came out of the woodwork, and with whatever the number was, 40,000 churches, there are a lot of little No Hope Baptist Church up in the holler Baptist churches, but they came out and said, what in the world is going on? I think we had a taste of that in New Orleans a little bit with the women thing. And I think the elites, and in some respects, I've been an elite before. I mean, I've been on the platform and the like, but the elites today, and that's not all of them, but they got out over their skis. And now, and because it was back in the South, you could get more people from little churches in Mississippi and so forth. I think we're awake. You've awakened a giant. I hope so.
Yeah. No, it's good. I definitely, yeah, it was 21 was I think mildly hopeful, especially there wasn't one the year before.
Yeah,
But then there was some weird stuff with abortion and abolition and this and that, and
yeah,
still some critical theory stuff, and
yeah,
then it was kind of like you left kind of scratching your head, and that's where I became more of an abolitionist and less of a just a pro life, because it
yeah,
seems like a lot of pro life people want the whole thing to continue, just less or
yeah,
something, and it's
yeah,
like, if we get rid of it, we're not going to have a boogeyman. I remember
yeah,
hearing Rand Paul talk, and I know it's political, but still the same issue, is when GOP had everything, the House, the Senate, and the presidency.
yeah,
He was told, he's like, by whoever, probably McConnell and guys like that, we could get rid of it, but if we abolish abortion legislatively, it's still, we won't have a boogeyman, is basically what he was
hmm,
getting at.
ah, interesting.
And I think that's a lot of times the case. I can't say that for everybody, of course, but then 2022, Anaheim was, I think, really just horrible. And
Hmm.
of course, it's West Coast and all that. But yeah, I'm encouraged, because it seems, yeah, a lot of good churches have left, and things like that, and some big names, if you will. But a lot of other people have left too. A lot more of the far more moderate, if you will, but really
Hmm.
liberal. Russ Moore, Beth Moore, of course.
Hmm.
Several other bigger pastors. Furtick, speaking of him, Elevation Church, they left at the
Yeah,
end of the of
yeah,
June, and oh, they kind of just said, well, whatever. But I'm 99% sure that it was because we kicked out Rick Warren. And if we're kicking out Rick Warren, we're
yeah,
kicking out Steven Furtick. And that's embarrassing. And
yeah,
so I think they wanted to get out ahead of it and just say, yeah, because they have, I mean, his wife preaches, they have other preachers I've
yeah,
watched really critically, but sermons from lady preachers,
yeah,
they're at Elevation Church, and maybe they're not quote unquote on staff, or the role of a pastor versus the function of a pastor. Well, none of that's in the scripture. Like, again, we're just, we have these ideas, and forget the regular principle, and we barely have the normative principle. Let's just do whatever principle. And
right.
it's like, what?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
who said that was fine? It's like, well, it's working. We got thousands of people. We just
yeah,
filled up the Predators whatever center there
yeah,
in Nashville. We got great music. Shut
yeah,
up. Get out of here,
yeah,
little tiny church, little tiny
yeah.
pastor, whatever.
Yeah,
So
no, it's really,
I
and I
think
think a lot of the
pragmatism
young guys are watching and
is
saying, "Oh, that's what the cool dudes do," and and I hear stuff like, I mean, even back in the day, and I know it's different in parts of the world and in the different day, but we would go out on Tuesday night and knock on doors and present the gospel or whatever, and
yeah.
now, oh, you can't do that. You can't have revivals. You can't do this and this, and they're saying that doesn't work. Well, I'm thinking, okay, what if you preach through Romans and faithfully, and you don't have a lot of people come to the Lord and say, "Oh, that doesn't work. I won't preach through Romans again." You just preach through Romans. You just do your thing.
Right.
And yet we are such little marketers now, um, that really troubles me. But again, I'm pretty hopeful about things, because I think, just like with the Bud Light, we've
Yeah.
almost had our elegant sufficiency of cool. I'm hopeful of
Yeah.
that.
No, I agree with that, and that's good. Um, yeah, I think social media plays a huge aspect of
Oh,
that as
huge,
well. Just kind of
huge.
the overall, far different than it was even 15
Yeah,
years ago, much less 40 or 50 years ago.
yeah.
Um,
By the way, I did a
the
oh, go ahead. Yeah.
no, go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say, I did a book on the, revival associated with the plane crash at Marshall University, and, um,
Oh yeah,
it called
that's right.
God and Humanity at Marshall. I'd ran into the BSU director at the time, who had at the time been there. He was now at West Point, or Baptist Collegiate Ministry, Baptist Student Union, and he said, "Yeah, we had a revival. People got concerned with their souls and their mortality, and then there was some kind of a ingathering." So I said, I'd like you to write it up. He said, "I don't write much. Would you do it?" And I ended up going to Huntington and Marshall about a dozen times and going through the
Mm,
archives. And it
wow.
ended up being a book about the entire spiritual history of Marshall. And I'm talking to the guys now who are pastors in the area, and they're saying the big problem now is the idolatry of likes. That is, when you post something on,
Mm,
Twitter or Facebook or some social media, how many uh, people send your thing on, or how many like it, and
yeah.
that's kind of the measure of your value. And it's
It
and
so
now,
is.
boy, we're just absolutely subject to the blowing all over the place. It's
Yeah.
a terrible thing.
Oh, that's so true, man. See, and that goes back to, I think we were off air at that point, but talking about, I'm in a couple groups, and I don't know a lot of the guys, but a lot of off channels.
Right.
And sometimes it's just, what are you doing? Like, you got multiple firing off tweets on all different directions, and I can't, you can't point to a verse and say, "Thou shalt not try and go viral," right, or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, what is your goal here? Is it to really encourage and rebuke, come alongside the brother or the sister, or say, "Hey, you're off here. Your doctrine, the scripture says," or is it, "Ha, gotcha, zah,
Yeah.
yeah, gotcha," and you're like,
Yeah.
I mean, I see that, in this YouTube world, and there's people that they do good stuff, and my own heart sometimes gets a little envious. It's like, man, are you serious? Like 100,000 views in a
Yeah.
day, or whatever, or 500,000 in a week, and you're like, what? How do you have that many subscribers? How does this happen? But it's always this kind of zingy discernment ministry, these little titles, these little clickbaity things.
Yeah.
And, that's just, I don't know. I'm tempted, but at the same time, I don't want to do it, because it does, it's the same gimmicks you get and do with church. If you're going to always feed them cotton candy, and, you're kind of dragging them into the front door with the cotton candy, you're going to have to keep them with the cotton candy. You pull out the steak, you pull out the potatoes, they're going to say, "What is this? I don't want, no, give me more cotton candy." And so you just kind of have to keep going with it.
Yeah. And I mean, I follow a lot of stuff. I check in on all kinds of things in the morning. I run my traps, as one of my old deacons said, and I'll find this and that, like, oh, I didn't know that. Oh, there's something that's just erupted down at Southwestern. Oh my goodness, look, this college is giving away the store. I used to trust them. I mean, it's good to stay up. But again,
I'm not saying don't. Yeah. But sometimes you can get too zingy.
and you make that the God. By the way, one thing that I just wrote a piece, it's about 2,500 words, I think, about the new thing that's come out, where the National African American Fellowship of the Southern Baptist Convention, the leader says there are 4,000 of them in this. They're very concerned about our grumpiness about using pastor for women. And not so much the senior pastor, but minister, pastor of discipleship, pastor of youth, pastor of that. And so they're playing that card now. And I see Bart Barber's going to go meet with them and the like. So I just wrote a piece on that. And well, I'm going to post it on my little Mark Coppenger website. If my tech guy has it now, I guess he'll put it up soon. But it strikes me that, like, well, there are a bunch of us do that. Well, all the more concern we need to don't do that. I mean,
it's not to confirm it.
Yeah. So anyway, I think we've made ourselves particularly susceptible. Of course, the whole culture has, to like, oh, they're unhappy. Oh my goodness. Well, look what we've done to them through the years. And it is funny. We overreach. I see now there's this Native American group who wants to change the name from Guardians back to Redskins. Like, no, just chill. And there's some of the more curious, or I would say more courageous guys now are black pastors who are pushing back and say, this is not who we are, I mean, you have the secular guys like Thomas Sowell and John McWhorter and the guy over at Eastern Kentucky, and there are just a number of these guys who have said, hey, this is crazy, but still the force is saying, oh, we're awful, don't do anything to offend them, we must accommodate, and think, guys, that's just an endless game. It's kind of like the CRT game. It's just a bottomless pit of sensitivity and self-recrimination.
No, it's funny. It's so often, people with blue hair who look like our relatives versus people who are actually that ethnicity, right? There's the man on the streets interview talking to the guy, and, hey, do you think it's offensive, Redskins, Indians, this and that? And Native Americans, Indians are like, no, like, I think it's great. I think it's this. Warriors, we have Apache helicopters, this and this, tomahawks, on and on and on. Like, hello, it's all over the place, but it's this and these things, and then this is over here. We have Adam's apple, right? We have all these biblical things. Money is the root of all kinds of evil, and all these kind of euphemisms that come from the scripture. We have these other things of other cultures, whether you're in Louisiana and a lot of it's black French slavery type whole thing
Right.
versus North Carolina versus New York, California. You get Hispanic. I mean, there's Santa and San, a million cities in California, San Francisco, San Diego, Santa Barbara. Well, those are all Spanish, right? And that's all saints, Saint Barbara, Saint
Corpus
Francisco,
Christi,
Saint
body of
Corpus
Christ.
Christi. I mean, exactly. Like there's just so much everywhere. I mean, it's just, peppered and salted on everything. Great. That's what makes us great I mean, it's like canceling Aunt Jemima and Uncle Ben and all this stuff. Like, well, they're mad. It's like, I don't know any black woman who's mad that Aunt Jemima has a brand making pancakes and syrup. Like, no sense. But it's the white liberals and these people who are in the boardrooms with, blue hair and 40 piercings. It's like, oh, they're all upset. And it's like, where are they? Well, I don't know, but they're upset. And it's like, huh? And I feel like we do that in the church. I mean, there's so many tactics I see and have seen, a little less in New Orleans. It was a lot tighter, especially with having different parliamentarians, which I think was really good, and kind of keeping the pace of everything, not letting Rick Warren speak for 6.5 minutes, things like that.
Amazing.
But it was good. He had 3 minutes. They cut him off. But there's so much stuff, and maybe you can fill in a comment, and we'll get to the last question here in a sec. But there's so many things, and I'll ask, why is this? But maybe you've already answered it. But like, why? Like, aren't we supposed to be in it but not of it? Aren't we supposed to like push against it? But yet, so many of the tactics of these kind of bully pulpits and this thing and this shame and oh, how dare you? Like these people are victims, and it's like, actually, they've committed a crime. Actually, they're killing people. Actually. And I'm the bad guy because I pointed it out. That's exactly what the leftists do. That's exactly what the woke mob does. And it's like, aren't you Christians? Don't you love Jesus? And yet they kind of put on their, Jesus sport coat or whatever, and they're, hold their Bible. I mean, why? Like, have we already addressed that? I don't know.
One thing I noticed, I think I told you the other time, I went to a church that had been led by a liberal in South Arkansas. At a seminary.
That's right. Yeah, you were pastoring there. Was that like what, the 70s?
And well, it was 80s. And
80s, okay.
Anyway, right. He'd had them for 20 years and persuaded them that inerrantists were redneck troublemakers. But I thought, well, they're in Arkansas, so they must be conservative. That's where I grew up. And that's
they thought you were liberal and you thought they were conservative.
I had a PhD in philosophy. And boy, did we get a surprise. But I felt like an Aggie minesweeper, just kind of walking through the field, blowing things up. And I didn't know they would blow up. But I remember one time I said something critical of Mormonism. And anyway, this choir member came up to me later with a little trembling lip and said, well, my daughter married a Mormon and they're real wholesome and blah, 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 like that. So you do have pushback from individuals. The real problem is their coterie of co-offendees or something that now people say, oh, you've wounded so-and-so. Oh, so-and-so, did you know she's upset? And so you expect people, I don't know, whatever, in race things, you expect the Sharptons and the Jacksons and so forth to raise a stink, but it's the people who gather around them and the corporate funders and the shakedown guys that have been shook down. And it's the mass that follows these folks. And until the people who prop them up and say, oh, somebody's got their feelings hurt. And you can feel very Christian about that. You're wounded, but like, hey, this book is edgy. This Bible is edgy. And if you're going to, holler and get a bunch of friends to come whenever you get a paper nick, game over. So I think we have a lot of people who hustle. By the way, I mentioned one thing. I was walking last night in the neighborhood and I came across a couple of guys mowing lawns, and they had one of these big riding mowers and they were just wanting to talk. It was a cool night. And we had both had military backgrounds. And I was talking about the day when I was in a mechanized unit and our armored vehicles got 2 gallons to the mile. And 2 miles to the gallon. And then we said, and then there was the tank retriever, the M88, that got 2 gallons to the mile. And we were talking about these, maneuver things. And here is the Biden administration saying by such and such year, we want our vehicles in the field to be electric. Like, you're going to find a charging station, in East Germany or what, back in the day. The insanity, the funny thing about it, I've told that reptiles can go real big. because they don't have a natural limit to their growth. They just kind of grow until they die or something. That these guys, it just metastasizes into insanity, and you have these these trans reading hours in the libraries and all that stuff. And you just say, part of me just wants to say, hey, keep it up. Here's a candy bar. Catch your breath, have at it again, because there's no limit to their insanity, or they're lying. And I think what they're doing is they feel like they're lying to Hitler. Well, that's righteous. You can deceive him. So just part of me is like, stop it. And part of me is like, but not right away. Keep going crazy.
Well, it shows, you're saying like that it'll pop, right? Like to the point of
or will
grow
pop
so far, it'll just pop.
Yeah.
Like keep going with the insanity. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, and that's I think an encouragement for me too, even within the SBC and just kind of evangelicalism in general.
Right.
And just so lastly, I guess kind of just wrapping up, what then, my audience is kind of more or less split, but especially guys, since I'm a guy, you're a guy, there is a massive deficit in boys, and there's all sorts of theories and reasons why, and chemicals in the water, and like all sorts of other stuff, and conditioning, and divorce, and pornography, and like, the feminization of boys, right? There's a lot. I don't know what the number is, but it seems like there's more boys that trans to girl than girl to boy. Now, some do both, right? Or some there's obviously girls that go boy, if you will, if you want to call it that.
Yeah.
But it seems like, especially with the women's sports stuff, which I'm encouraged even to see, there's certain places that are banning that, and okay, biological males can't do it anymore, blah, blah, blah. It's like, well, no, duh, I don't know why we allowed this to begin with. Like, but where can men go? What do you kind of recommend? Maybe some books, old or new, some thought leaders, Christian thought leaders, Tucker Carlson, he's nice, Jordan Peterson, great, but they're at the edge. Andrew Tate, I know he's way more offensive, and but he has some points. And you're like, why are there not Christian men speaking like this? No, he's also basically a pimp and all sorts of other stuff, and talks about how to get girls and everything else. But he has some points that your pastor, your local guy, or even some of these big SBC guys, they're not going to even talk. Certainly not the pimping, right? But the other things, hey, work hard, do this, get up early, have goals. Where can we go, Mark? Where can we go?
Well, I tell you a funny thing in that connection. ETS has a program every year, and this year's theme is like theological anthropology. And I thought, look, I'm gonna submit a paper proposal, and I guess I've been there 25 years, and 23 years had my paper accepted. But I sent one in about like men and women. I mean, the anthropology, God's feminine and masculine saints, and they were not moved by the Spirit to accept the paper this year. And so anyway, I mentioned it to somebody, and there's a new website called TruthScript that Jonathan Harris is behind. And I think in a very early issue of it, he said, well, write that thing up. And so I did a piece on manliness, and it's been up there for a month or so.
That came out right before the convention, right?
Yeah, I think so. I can't remember. But anyway,
I think.
The point is, well, in it, I do list a variety of people pushing back. I mean, you have all the feminists, and that thing's been going since Kate Millett and Germaine Greer and all that kind of stuff. But I talked about Jordan Peterson and even Joe Rogan and the like. There's a guy who's been a professor at Harvard, I think it is, and it came out with Yale Press, or he's been a prof at Yale and came out with Harvard Press, and it's called Manliness, and it's by Harvey Mansfield, and he's not a Christian. He says he's not a Christian. I quote him in this thing, and he says he got a call from an alumni magazine, I think at Harvard, and said, what do you think about this retiring professor? And he said, well, I think one thing was his manliness. And there's a pause at the end of the phone. And she said, don't you want to reword that? And it was as though he'd stepped in it, And so he got to thinking, what's the deal with manliness? And he basically says it's kind of the willingness to defend women, even at personal sacrifice, like Barney Fife stepping in front of Bluto and saying, you're not going to put your hand on Thelma Lou, and he's about to be beaten to a pulp. But he says that's the key of the thing. Well, here he is, not a believer, standing up for manliness, while all the sensitive guys, Christians and the like. And then in it, I list a variety of pushbacks. I mean, even Josh Hawley in Congress has written one. And I mean, there's just all kinds of people who are pushing back. So very briefly, I think we have absolutely broke even the sort of thing where he's the under shepherd, and they capitalize under, that I'm going to facilitate her and everything, everything that she wants. And I'm just, and they run so far away. It's like the race thing. They're terrified of not being sensitive. And anyway, that's something I've written on the thing. And I just think it might be worth a look. But here again, you've got to have these guys who are not sensitive like us, tender whatever's, saying, hey, come on.
Yeah, no, it's true. Who would you say? I know you mentioned so go to Truth Script if you haven't already. I know several of the listeners do listen or read it, but you've got an article there. I think it came out in June. So you have a lot of people listed there. You're saying,
I list something like, I don't know, maybe 8 of the people who have one way, and even the secular guy. Men are from Mars, women from Venus, well, he's not our guy. And yet he at least is alert enough to say, hey, there really is a difference between these two genders. So it's just a shame that we have to fall back. I think there was a day maybe when preachers were leading on the cutting edge of cultural sanity and the like. And now we're waiting to think, oh, is there a critical mass yet where I can now say it without running a bunch of church members off or something? And so, and I don't mean you have to go out of your way. You don't have to be a dog that chases every car, but there is you just can't be cowering with the word of God.
Yeah, I think cowardice, and that's something I want to say I struggle with to the balance of how much and how little, in rural Kentucky.
Oh yeah.
But at the same time, we have these little rectangle boxes that everybody has that get, like you said, you got off Twitter a few years ago, whatever. And, I think that's a wise decision for almost everybody. But, still Facebook and Instagram and this thing, and depending on how old you are, it almost doesn't matter these days. There's still this, hey, Fox News is still good. It's like, Fox News is kind of trash most of the time, actually. Look here, exhibit A through Z, and yet you're like, well, I like Tucker Carlson, then Fox News is bad. Tucker Carlson's great, but even listening to his news show, which is on Twitter, there's a few things that he said in the first couple episodes, and you're like, no. And that's more like, worldview. Hey, we were evolution, blah, blah, blah. We evolved and we had tools. And it's like, no, that's completely wrong. Like, that is not scientifically accurate, yet that's the zeitgeist of the day, that evolution's true, materialism's true, the earth is billions of years old, blah, blah, blah. And yet a lot of Christians, I mean, I'll die on that hill every single day, because not only that's how the Lord used to save me, and come to him through the gospel. And that didn't save me. The gospel did, of course, or Christ did. But at the same time, I think it's maybe not as offensive and crazy as pornography, but it's now this kind of ethos, this blanket or this air that we all breathe. Yeah. And then we're kind of like, you don't believe in evolution. The average believer, you're a backward, bigoted. You think God created recently, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. And by the way, the global climate thing too is another religion that, and we met first over the evolution thing. I know we're at a time here, but there was podcast, not a podcast, but some kind of thing with a debate involving somebody on evolution. But at any rate, we've come to this. I heard that there was a prof at a Tennessee Baptist college who reprimanded a prof at a Texas Baptist college for coming out young earth. And he basically said, think what you will, but shut up. They think we're idiots. Don't put that out there and make us subject, to criticism. Meanwhile, you've got Jerry Fodor, who taught at MIT, went to Rutgers, and you have Thomas Nagel, who had been reading some stuff. These are not Christians, and yet they're high-ranked philosophers who say there's something wrong with evolution. One says you can't get consciousness out of matter, and the other guy had another criticism. And so you almost have to get your courage from these guys when we should be saying, look at the text. Look, the other day, it was for Father's Day. A number of us were on stage at the church. My son's my pastor, and we were up there and we were talking about being a father. And I just said some simple things about, I mean, now it's like, no man ever goes to his deathbed thinking, I wish I'd spent more time at work. It's always like, I need to be at home. And I said, well, wait a second here. Yeah, you got to do that. But I said, look, is the point to being a father to like working your kids to build a birdhouse so they can be fathers to build birdhouses with their kids, so they can be fathers to build birdhouses with their kids? I say, somebody has to go out and slay the dragons. And I said, like, well, what about military people? I mean, they're gone for a year, or policemen. I mean, if it's all about just that little nurturing thing, which is important, and you and I've done it, and I just said a few things like that. Marriage is the oldest institution. It's before academia. It's before, commerce, before the military and so forth. It's like Genesis 2. And you mess with that and then you blow up the whole thing. And so I'm just saying a few things like that. And people came up to me later like, thank you for saying that. And particularly about fathers being fathers and going out and slaying dragons. And the whole point is not just to have a little warm time with your kids. And I think people are hungry for something with an edge to it. Now, by the way, as I said, I was in some interesting conflictive waters, and it was in a big church, my first church. So you could have 10 grumpy, but then 30 not grumpy. So you've got that working with you. But I had a thing up on the wall, and it basically said, I got this from someplace, don't attribute to malice what can be explained in terms of confusion or ignorance. And if they'd been fed this for 20 years, they're not malevolent. They're just going with what they know. And they had never heard this verse on divorce and remarriage, or never heard this on, whatever theology. So there's that. And then you pick your battles. I mean, somebody's like working with one particular thing, and you don't have to slam him for not taking up your cause. So there are a variety of things to pace yourself.
Yeah. Well, I just got disconnected there for a moment, so you went full screen. I don't know if
I saw that. I liked that. I felt grinding for a moment there.
I do that. I used to go back and forth with that, and then people would think you're getting like, "Oh, did I lose you?" and get disconnected. So I leave us both up.
There.
There's probably that too. I could just put you up the whole time. No, that's good. Yeah. I mean, it's something that it's frustrating, and even as me as a pastor, of a smaller church, it's hard because like I know these things, but then it's like passing that knowledge on to the men and the women and the families that are there and the retired folks. And like, it's hard. I got to say, it's hard to get everybody together and say, okay, so this thing 20 years ago that you're used to, that didn't work. It was actually unbiblical. And this other thing, it's not really great anyway. And pragmatism didn't really, okay. And then I think we should do this because after all, we used to do this, but now we do this instead. Let's go back to that other thing that's more biblical that worked.
Right.
And yet, sometimes people just, they don't want to do it, or it's anyway, it's hard. And just for pastors in general, or guys going into the pastorate, it's hard, but you got to stay for a bit, even a few years, and live with people, love people, lead people. Because I agree. I mean, I think the pastors should be the top guys in calling out. I use calling out loosely, but being a beacon, being a light in proclaiming the word of God, and how does this apply for us, and not waiting and saying, okay, it seems like, well, so-and-so said something, so now I can say something. And it's like, well, the text says this here.
Yeah.
God said it, so we can say it, right?
No.
So it's...
By the way, I heard about one Christian college president who followed a more liberal Christian college president. And he told a friend of mine, he said, I feel like a guy trying to land a 10-pound bass on a 5-pound test line. And I'm afraid to jerk the line, or I could snap it. And I mean, you basically gotta love your people. And it helps to think of times when you were confused. This is a silly one, but we would read papers to each other each Friday afternoon at Wheaton in the philosophy department. And one time I said something like, well, aren't I entitled to so-and-so? And one of my colleagues gently said, are you saying, are I not entitled, like, aren't I? And it sounded right to me. And yet I thought, oh my goodness, but he didn't say, you're not fit to teach in the philosophy department.
Yeah.
People like you are dragging down our reputation. Like, no, it's like, hey, no, it's like, are I not? And there are a couple of other times. And it's like, yeah, I've needed correction. And I think of things that I voted for Jimmy Carter because he was a good old Southern Baptist who stood up against segregationists. And then I think he was a disaster as a president. But you look back and you just think, I make mistakes. People make mistakes. So you're trying to land them on a line that doesn't snap, and it depends on your situation. But still, thank God we have a book that we can just walk through and just say, well, it just seems to me that's there. If we were just making up sermons like Deep Thoughts by Jack Handey, I mean, good grief, who could stand? Okay.
Yeah. No, and that's and I appreciate you saying that. We'll wrap up with that then. I mean, it's there is forgiveness. We do make mistakes, and that's something that as believers, as followers of Christ, I'm a sinner. You're a sinner. Our wives are sinners. Our children, everybody, the churches, everybody, even the most heinous, crazy person is a sinner. They've fallen short of the glory of God.
Yeah.
And yet, in the world, and even in politics, even conservative politics, there's no forgiveness, right? There's no, these days, it's canceled. That's it. Oh, I'm sorry. You voted for so-and-so? No, canceled. Oh, you said that word in a comedy act 15 years ago? Canceled. There's this canceled. You can't. Oh, you said gay people can't get married? Canceled. And it's like, well, these are my convictions. This is what the text says. Maybe you're wrong, but it's the loud voices are the ones. I mean, it's really, cultural Marxism, right?
It is.
It's just the loud, the Darwinist view. I'm loud, and because I'm loud, I'm powerful. I'm powerful because I'm loud, and therefore, and I win. And it's like, what if you're wrong though? No, I'm not wrong because I'm the loudest. I'm the squeaky wheel that gets the grease. And it's, I mean, that's something that I think with that neutral myth that we've really kind of come to realize, at least I hope many of us have, that the school systems, right? The governments, politicians in general, big schools, there's not this, like you said earlier, with, the university and the multiversity, now it's a monoversity. They have this, and it's like, there's no cultural difference. And they just, this unifying sort of thing, or mono thing that they just shove you down. And that's it. And you can't get away from it. So,
hey, indulge me one more little anecdote. I mean, we talked about Bill Maher. I work for the Kairos Journal out of New York. And anyway, one of the guys who was doing some production for us, like some video, I think it may be for Bible Mesh, which was a spinoff of this. He used to work with Bill Maher. Not on the HBO show, but he had another one on network TV that was kind of the same thing. It was kind of a pugilistic thing. You bring people on. And he made that movie Religulous or Religulous and prickly and not to be trusted in 1,000 ways. However, he said he loved two Christians he had on there, and he just thought they were the greatest guys. And one of them was Jerry Falwell, and the other was Pat Boone. And that these guys did not shrink from proclaiming the counsel of God or just being who they were. And yet the way they carried themselves, and I guess you could say they were happy warriors for one thing. You don't have to be happy, but still, he said, I like those guys. And so he would give them a listen. And I think that we can be plain spoken, but we can also be, in a good way, impressive to the lost world.
Yeah. Well, and I appreciate you saying that. And that reminds me, just like, I don't want to say this earlier, but hypocrisy, no one likes hypocrisy. Right. No one likes a forked tongue, a double mind. And when you say, hey, the Bible says this, blah, 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 and then someone pushes back a little bit, like, well, maybe, all of a sudden you've lost all credibility. I mean, children especially see it. And so that's where, again, forgiveness comes in. And when you have biffed it, when you have been a coward, when you have gotten angry or lusted or gossiped or whatever, and it's clear against that person or those people, you go to those people, hey, will you forgive me? I mean, I've personally done that in secular work when I used to wait tables and things, and it completely disarms people. And this is even 10 plus years ago, and not to disarm them necessarily, but they realize, wait a second, this isn't that guy. What? The other guy that got mad at me just cursed me out, and now we don't talk. This other guy, got upset with me and said something, dumb or whatever. But then he came to me and asked for forgiveness.
Yeah.
And now this is way different. What is this Christian guy doing? And so anyway, that's what we have. That's the gospel, right? It's redemption and forgiveness, or forgiveness and redemption.
Good word.
So markcoppenger.com. You said you're not on Twitter anymore. That's good. Thumbs up. Where else can people follow you? I know you're writing. You wrote for TruthScript recently. You write all over. How can people, if they want to read you, where can they go? Where can they follow?
Yeah, I just post kind of pretty much reference or a link to everything I write. Either it's a brand new piece or an encounter, I'll run into something, or if I publish an article or a book or whatever, it's at markcoppenger.com. The website's just full of links to, or the substance of whatever I'm writing. So thanks for asking.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, for the audience, Dr. Coppenger, Mark Coppenger is my favorite. You're my favorite professor. You were.
Oh, you're kind.
Well, I think I only had you. Was it Church and State and Aesthetics? I don't think I had you a third time, but you were. We did shepherding groups with other people, and so you were our under shepherd there at the seminary for a few times, and again, we've shared many meals and other things. So definitely, you were worth following and listening to, in my estimation.
Well, thank you,
so I'm thankful for your.
I treasure you, Rich. Thank you.
Oh yeah. Well, praise God. I mean, I'm thankful for the friendship. That's it. Everybody go to markcoppenger.com if you want to follow, and go ahead and like and subscribe if you have not already. I appreciate it. Until next time, everybody, take care. God bless.